Hi everyone. Today we are going to talk about the book A Theory of Adaptation by Linda Hutcheon. She's a Canadian scholar who's really good at studying books and plays. She taught at the University of Toronto for a long time and was even the president of a big language organization. Hutcheon is famous for her ideas about postmodernism, which is a way of thinking about art and culture. Today we are focusing on the first two chapters of the book, including the preface. Basically, adapting stories has been popular for a long time. But people sometimes think that adaptations are not as good as the original stories. This can make people think that modern art forms, like parody and postmodernism, are not good too. But the book, A Theory of Adaptation, confirms that adaptations are valuable and important. In the preface, we see that the adaptations are not just limited to books and movies. In the Victorian era, people adapted everything from poems to paintings, while in modern times, we have adaptations in theme parks and virtual reality. The first chapter of the book talks about adaptations and how they are revisitation of prior works. It explores how different media and genres engage audiences, either by telling stories, showing them, or allowing us to physically interact with them. These three ways of engagement provide the structure of analysis for this book. The second chapter re-examines previous debates on adaptation theory, from a new perspective of modes of engagement. It evaluates the limitations and advantages of each mode for different types of adaptation. The book challenges some of the existing theories of adaptation in literature and film, expanding the scope of study to include all three modes of involvement. Chapter 3 focuses on the people who carry out the work of adaptation, especially in a collaborative creative mode like film. It analyzes why anyone would agree to adapt a work, knowing that their efforts would be seen as inferior to the original text or the audience's own imagined versions. Chapter 4 looks at how audiences engage with remediated stories in all three modes. It discusses the interactive mode, which demands physical participation in the story. Finally, Chapter 5 explores the context in which adaptations exist, including time, place, society, and culture. When a story travels from its context of creation to the adaptation's context of reception, change is inevitable. The book analyzes the different adaptations of the story of Carmen, showing how the meaning and impact of stories can change radically across cultures, languages, and history. Chapter 1 is starting with how can we theorize adaptation. Adaptations are when a story is told in different ways, like in movies or TV shows. This has been happening for a long time, even Shakespeare did it. Some people think that these new versions are not as good as the original and use words like tampering, violation, and perversion to criticize them. However, adaptations can also be successful, like the movie Titus. Some people don't like adaptations because they think they change the original story too much just to make money. But Virginia Woolf, who was a writer, saw potential in movies to show emotions that can't be put into words. Adaptations are popular because people like to see familiar stories in new ways. They are also a safe choice for making money because people already know the story. For example, many award-winning movies and TV shows are adaptations. This is because people always want new stories. Sometimes movies are turned into musicals or video games to make more money. This is called a franchise. For example, The Lion King is a movie that became a musical. This is a way to attract people who already like the original story. Some movies say they are adaptations even when they are not. This is because people think that stories from books are more important than movies. But it's not always true. Adapting a work of art is a complicated process that involves taking inspiration from another piece of art. It means reimagining and recreating the original work and can be a way of paying homage to it. The goal is not to copy the original exactly, but to make changes that suit the new version. An adaptation is its own unique creation and can refer to any alterations made to old works of art. However, it's important to note that sequels, prequels, fan fiction, and plagiarism are not considered adaptations. Here we see the way stories are adapted into different forms, like movies or video games, is a tricky subject in the legal world. Ideas in a story can't be copyrighted, but the way they are presented can be protected. When adapting a story to a new form, some things might need to change, like the order of events or the perspective from which the story is told. The important parts of the story, like the overall themes, can stay the same. In video game adaptations, the way the story is told can be different than in movies or books. Video games also offer interactivity, meaning players can explore the world of the story in a more immersive way. Some stories are hard to adapt because they take place in a world that's hard to visualize, like the world inside someone's mind. But with new technology, more stories can be adapted into different forms. Popular movies, like The Matrix and Star Wars, have even inspired video games based on their worlds. People often struggle to find the right words to describe adaptation, which is a complicated concept. Even though we use the same word for both the process and the end result, it's hard to define what adaptation really is. We need to think about different perspectives to fully understand it. Adapting something can mean creating something new or receiving it in a different way, so it's important to consider all aspects of the process. Even though it's difficult to define, the word adaptation has stuck around for a reason. When we want to share a story with a new audience, we sometimes need to change the way we tell it. This is called an adaptation. It could be based on something that really happened, or it could be completely made up. Sometimes we change the way the story looks or sounds, so that it's easier for people to understand and enjoy. The point is to share our stories and ideas in a way that everyone can appreciate. Basically, adaptations are a way of taking a story and making it accessible to a new audience in a new way. They can be very complex and involve a lot of changes, but there's still a way of sharing stories and ideas. When a book is turned into a movie, the person who does the writing for the movie has a big responsibility. They need to be respectful to the original author and their work, but also make the movie their own. Sometimes this means changing things from the book to fit better in the movie. Other times, it means adding more to the story so it works better on the big screen. Adaptation can also mean taking a story from one medium, like a book, and turning it into another, like a movie or play. This can be done to update the story, or to try and make it more interesting or meaningful. When people watch an adaptation, they often compare it to the original story. This can be helpful because it helps them understand the new version better. But it can also be confusing if things are changed too much. Overall, adaptation is about taking something old and making it new again. It's a way of using good ideas from the past to create something fresh and exciting. Adaptation is a complex thing, but we can understand it better if we think of it as both a product and a process. This means that instead of just looking at how stories are told, we also consider how people interact with them. Different types of stories, like books, movies, and video games, engage us in different ways. Some let us imagine a world in our minds, while others show us images and sounds. And some even let us physically participate in the story. It's important to remember that the way we experience a story depends on the medium it's presented in. For example, reading a book is a private experience that's more like watching TV at home than going to a movie theater. And when we see a live performance, it's a different kind of engagement than playing a video game. But sometimes the lines between these different types of media can blur. For example, some movies are made using computer game technology, but they're not interactive like a video game. And some video games can be turned into works of art for display in museums. So when we talk about adaptation, we need to think about all these different factors. It's not just about how the story is told, but also how the audience interacts with it and the context in which it's presented. There are 3 ways to tell stories: telling, showing, and interacting. These ways are important because they can be influenced by different things like time, space, society, and culture. In today's world, stories can be changed a lot when they are told in different places. People often change stories to fit their own culture, like in Germany where they changed Shakespeare's stories to fit their own language and ideas. Technology has made it easier to change stories too. Some famous stories, like those by Charles Dickens and Jane Austen, are very important to people, so they want to see them exactly as they are. But other stories, like those by J.R.R. Tolkien, Philip Pullman, and J.K. Rowling, can be changed more. In Chapter 2 of this investigation, we take another look at previous discussions on how adapting stories to different media affects the way people engage with them. We explore 3 different ways people can get involved in a story and see how each one affects the adaptation process. This helps us understand the advantages and limitations of each approach for different types of adaptations. While existing theories on how to adapt stories to movies and books are popular, we need to consider all 3 modes of involvement to get a full picture of how to do it right. We're questioning some of the commonly accepted ideas about how different media handle things like point of view, time, irony, ambiguity, metaphors and symbols, and silences and absences. The material used to create the adaptation is really important because it shapes how it will look and feel to the audience. Some people argue that different types of art should be kept separate from each other, but others think that it's okay to mix and match. When a book gets turned into a movie, sometimes the story gets simplified or changed in other ways. This can be good or bad depending on who you ask. Some people say that movies aren't as good as books because they can't show as much detail or emotion. Others think that movies can be better because they can add new things to the story that weren't in the book. This chapter looks at what makes adaptation work, and how it can be done in different ways depending on what you want to achieve. It's not always easy to turn one form of storytelling into another. Sometimes, changes are made to make it work better on stage or screen. The way a story is told can affect how it's adapted. Adapting a story is a big challenge, but when done well, it can bring a story to life in a whole new way. Sometimes, the way a story is told can affect how it's adapted. For example, a comic book might be easier to turn into a movie than a regular book. And some stories are better suited to certain types of adaptations. A ballet might not be the best way to tell a story with a lot of talking, but it can be great for showing emotion through dance. Basically, adapting a story is a big challenge, and it can be hard to make everyone happy. But when it's done well, it can bring a story to life in a whole new way. Performance art like operas and musicals can be adapted to TV and movies in 2 ways, sacrificing realism for self-reflexivity or making it seem more natural. TV shows have more time to tell the story, like the 6-hour adaptation of Angels in America. Adaptations may require changing the plot to fit the new medium's rules. There are many different types of adaptations, and they can be quite different from the original. When it comes to digital media, there are 2 ways to enjoy it. You can either actively participate or just watch. For example, computer games let you be in control and feel like you're really there. Theme parks and virtual reality also let you interact with your surroundings. When it comes to telling stories in digital media, there are things to think about like the tone and perspective. Overall, digital media is a fun and always changing way to create new worlds and tell stories. Here we see lots of clichés examples. The way we tell stories varies, but movies and books often use similar techniques. In the future, movies may focus more on the person telling the story. Avoiding fancy techniques and adding emotional depth are important. Different media use different ways to show stories, but the most important thing is to make the audience feel involved. Cliché 2 talks about, when telling a story, different types of art have their own strengths. Movies can show what characters are doing, but language can explain their thoughts and feelings better. Some people say that movies can't show inner thoughts well, but sounds and visual effects can help convey emotions. Music is important too, since it can create a certain mood or atmosphere. Each kind of art shows time differently, making it hard to adapt a story from one to another. but this can also lead to new and exciting ways of telling stories. In Cliché 3 says, when stories are adapted from books to movies or TV shows, it can be tricky to figure out how to show the passage of time. In live performances, time passes in real time, but movies and TV shows can show flashbacks and flash-forwards. There are different techniques that filmmakers use to cue the audience that time has passed, like showing a calendar page turning. Some adaptations, like video games, let you experience the story at your own pace. New technology is also allowing for more creative ways to show time passing and memories accumulating throughout a story. It's all about finding the best way to tell the story while keeping the audience engaged and interested. Moving into the cliché number 4. The Turn of the Screw is a book by Henry James that has caused a lot of debate among scholars because of its unclear meaning. Some movies and plays have been made based on the book, but they often don't capture the same level of confusion and mystery that the book has. In 1954, a chamber opera was created that used music to create a scary atmosphere. Some people think that it's hard to make movies or plays based on books because there are things that are easy to describe in words but hard to show on a screen. For example, sometimes a book will have a character say something that means the opposite of what they are actually feeling. This is hard to show in a movie or play. In this section, we see an interesting story about Billy Budd which has been adapted into various forms of art, including an opera, a play, and a film. The story is about a Navy captain named Billy who is executed for a mutiny plot. The opera version faced challenges with narrative voice and characterization, but stayed true to the author's intentions. The scene after Claggart's death and Billy's trial highlights the challenges of representing interiority and ambiguity in dramatic form. The impact of 34 triadic chords in the opera creates a powerful effect. The story's ending is complex, but explores representation of ambivalence and absence in different art forms. To sum up the presentation, the book A Theory of Adaptation challenges this idea and looks at why people make adaptations in different forms of media. The book talks about the people who make adaptations and how people like to hear or see stories in different ways. It also looks at how the meaning of stories can change a lot when they are told in different cultures, languages, or times in history.